Welcome to Elizabeth Stories. Today, we follow Iris Lorne, a widow betrayed by family who reclaims her strength, uncovers the house's mystical secrets, and builds a legacy with her granddaughter. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly videos revealing hidden truths. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the stories. The house was alive that evening, whispering secrets it had kept for decades. Its bones creaked under the weight of memory, the oak floors groaning softly as I moved through the kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary and roasted lamb, a feast I'd spent hours preparing for a family that no longer felt like mine. My hands calloused from years of tending gardens and kneading dough, adjusted the silver serving tray on the counter, tilting it just so to catch the flicker of the gaslight chandelier. The tray gleamed a relic from my mother's time, etched with vines that seemed to writhe in the half-light. I paused, my reflection caught in its polished surface. Not the face of Iris Lorne, the woman who'd buried a husband and raised a son, but something sharper, older, as if the tray held a piece of my soul I'd forgotten. I was alone in the kitchen, or so I thought, when her voice slithered through the hallway light as a breeze but sharp as a blade. "Make sure that's her glass, Nathan." Pauline said, her tone careless, almost musical, as if she were commenting on the weather. "She'll be out before the dessert course. I don't want her meddling with the toast tonight." I froze. My hand still gripping the tray tightened until the metal bit into my palm. The words hung in the air, heavy with intent, and the house seemed to hold its breath alongside me. My heart didn't race. It stilled, as if it too were listening, waiting for the next revelation. I edged closer to the doorway, the shadows of the hall cloaking me. The dining room was just beyond its long mahogany table, set with my grandmother's bone china. Each plate a silent witness to the evenings I had hosted here year after year for a family that had slowly turned me into a ghost in my own home. Nathan's voice came next, low and muffled, the words indistinct but the tone familiar, hesitant, complicit. I strained to hear, my breath shallow, but only caught fragments. "Sure, it's safe." Then Pauline again, her laugh a soft chime that masked something colder. "It's harmless, darling. She'll sleep like a child. We just need one evening without her." Opinions. The word opinions landed like a stone in my chest. They were talking about me. Me, Iris. The woman who'd paid their mortgage, their car loans, their children's school fees. The woman who'd held this family together through grief and debt and silent resentments. And now they were plotting to silence me, to slip something into my glass, to keep me docile out of their way. I stepped back, my bare feet silent on the cool tile. The kitchen was my domain, always had been a place where I could control the chaos of the world outside. But tonight, it felt like a battlefield. Above the stove hung a small, cracked mirror, an oddity my husband Elias had insisted on installing decades ago. To keep an eye on the past, he'd said, with that half-smile of his, the one that always hinted at secrets he never shared. I caught my reflection. Now my gray eyes steady, unyielding, the same eyes that had stared down loss and betrayal before. They were the eyes of a woman who'd buried her husband under a sky too blue for mourning, who'd watched her son drift into a life that didn't include her. I looked like a statue, carved from stone and time. But beneath that calm surface, something stirred a spark. A flicker of something ancient and fierce. The mirror's crack seemed to pulse a jagged line that split my reflection into two versions of myself, the Iris who endured and the Iris who was waking up. I turned away, my gaze falling to the row of glasses on the counter, each filled with water from the spring well out back, the one Elias swore carried the taste of the earth itself. One glass was marked not visibly, but I knew. Pauline had been in here earlier, fussing over the table settings, her manicured fingers lingering too long on one particular glass. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now her actions took on a sinister clarity. She'd chosen her weapon carefully, something subtle, undetectable, meant to dull my mind and keep me from challenging her carefully curated evening. I counted my steps to the dining room 10 each, one deliberate, each one grounding me in the reality of what I'd heard. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single sconce that cast long shadows like fingers reaching for something they couldn't grasp. I paused at the threshold, watching them through the half-open door. Pauline and Nathan stood at the table arranging silverware with practiced ease, their faces lit by the soft glow of candles. She kissed his cheek, a gesture so tender it might have fooled someone else, then glided toward the hallway to fetch the wine. Nathan's eyes followed her, but they didn't meet mine. They never did anymore. I smiled, a practiced curve of my lips that hid the storm brewing inside. I crossed the room, picked up the water glasses, and carried them back to the kitchen. My movements were fluid, unhurried, as if I were simply refreshing the water. But my mind was a whirl of calculations, each thought sharper than the last. I poured out the tainted glass, refilled it with fresh water, and set it back in its place. Then, with a sleight of hand honed from years of gardening where every seed, every root demanded precision, I switched my glass with Pauline's. A quiet act, unnoticed, but final. The house seemed to hum in approval, a low vibration I felt in my bones, as if it too had grown tired of being taken for granted. This was my house, after all. They'd insisted on hosting the dinner here, claiming it was cozier, more traditional, that my dining room was perfect for family. But I knew the truth. My house was a stage for their performance, a backdrop to their carefully crafted image of respectability. Their sleek city apartment, with its cold grays and sharp angles, didn't carry the weight of history, the warmth of lineage. My home did. It was a place of roots of stories etched into every beam and floorboard, and they used it to prop up their fragile facade. I was the prop, too, a convenient grandmother, a silent benefactor good for appearances, but not for opinions. I returned to the dining room, setting the glasses down with a gentleness that belied the fire in my chest. Pauline re-entered holding a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon like a trophy, her smile as polished as the glass in her hand. "Your favorite, Iris," she said, my name dripping from her lips like something sour. I nodded, my voice soft but steady. "Lovely." The others arrived soon after. My grandson Henry shuffled in, his eyes glued to his phone, oblivious to the undercurrents in the room. My granddaughter Amy was different, quiet, observant, her hands folding napkins without being asked, her gaze flickering toward me with a warmth that felt like a lifeline. The table, filled, the candles danced, and the roast sat cooling as Pauline fussed over the lighting, orchestrating the evening like a director on a set. But I was no longer just a player in her script. I sat at the head of the table, my navy dress smoothed against my thighs, my hands folded calmly in my lap. The cracked mirror's image lingered in my mind, a reminder of the woman I'd been and the one I was becoming. I'd always thought of this house as a sanctuary, but tonight it felt like something more, a crucible, a place where truths would be forged or broken. As Pauline raised her glass for the toast, her voice rang out, bright and performative. To family, she said, her eyes sweeping the table but avoiding mine. To patience and to keeping things civil. The words were a barb cloaked in sweetness, and they drew a few confused glances. Nathan let out a tight chuckle, and the silence that followed stretched too long, heavy with unspoken truths. She drank her throat, moving as she swallowed, and I watched my own glass raised but untouched. The moment felt charged, as if the air itself held its breath. The house, too, seemed to lean in its walls, listening, its shadows deepening. I'd always believed there was something alive in these old timbers, a presence that had watched over me since I was a girl, when my grandmother would tell me stories of the women who'd lived here before women who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger women who'd carried secrets in their bones. I wondered if they were watching now, their whispers woven into the creak of the floorboards urging me to act. I didn't drink. I set my glass down my eyes, never leaving Pauline's. She didn't notice, too caught up in her performance, but Amy did. Her gaze flicked to me, a question in her eyes, and I gave her the smallest nod. She didn't know what I'd done, not yet, but she knew me well enough to sense the shift. Something had changed in me, something fundamental, and it wasn't just the glass. The dinner began the conversation, a fragile veneer over the tension. Talk of schools, promotions, a vacation planned for July. None of it about me except when Pauline turned her smile too bright and said, "I hope the food's not too salty for your blood pressure, Iris." Her tone was a blade disguised as concern, and I met it with a smile of my own, one that carried an edge she didn't catch. "We'll find out, won't we?" She didn't. She never did. But as the minutes ticked by, I watched her closely, my senses heightened, attuned to every flicker of her expression. The house seemed to watch with me, its shadows shifting subtly, as if aligning themselves with my intent. There was a power here in this moment, in this place, a power I'd forgotten I could wield. It wasn't just the act of switching the glasses. It was the choice to see, to act, to reclaim what had been taken from me piece by piece over the years. 20 minutes later, Pauline began to falter. Her blinks grew slower, her hand brushing her temple as if to ward off a headache. She sipped more water, her movements sluggish, her fork pausing mid-air. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice gentle, almost tender, but laced with something else, something ancient, like the house itself. "Fine," she mumbled her words, slightly slurred. "Just tired." I nodded, my face a mask of concern, but inside the spark I had felt earlier flared into a flame. This wasn't just about the glass anymore. It was about every slight, every dismissal, every time I had been reduced to a checkbook or a convenient prop. It was about the years I'd spent believing kindness was enough to hold a family together, only to learn it was a currency they'd spent without thought. The dining room grew quieter, the conversation faltering as Pauline's posture slackened. Henry glanced up from his phone, his brow furrowing. Amy's eyes darted between us, sensing something amiss, but not yet understanding. Nathan sat still, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his face a mask of unease. And I, Iris Lorne, sat at the head of my table in my house with my secrets feeling the weight of their betrayal and the strength of my response. The house hummed again, a low approving note as if it had been waiting for this moment as long as I had. The cracked mirror in the kitchen, the etched tray, the spring water, they were all part of this place, part of me, part of a legacy that stretched back through generations of women who'd faced their own battles and won. I wasn't just Iris anymore. I was something more, something awakened, and the night was far from over. The dining room was a stage, and I was no longer content to play the silent extra. The candles flickered, their flames casting jagged shadows that danced across the mahogany table like specters waiting for a cue. My family sat around it, their faces bathed in the warm glow, but the light didn't reach their eyes. Not Nathan's, not Pauline's, not even Henry's, who was too engrossed in his phone to notice the undercurrent of tension. Only Amy, my granddaughter, seemed to sense it, her gaze darting to me as if she could hear the same low hum I felt in my bones, a vibration from the house itself urging me forward. I sat at the head of the table, my navy dress, A quiet armor, my hands folded calmly in my lap. The glass in front of me sparkled its water clear and untainted now, thanks to my sleight of hand in the kitchen. Beside it sat Pauline's glass, identical in appearance, but carrying the weight of her betrayal, a potion she'd intended for me, meant to dull my voice, my presence, my very existence, for the sake of her perfect evening. I'd switched them a silent act that felt like a vow sealed not with words, but with the steady pulse of my own resolve. The house seemed to approve its walls, exhaling a faint sigh, as if it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for me to claim my place. Pauline raised her glass, her movements graceful, rehearsed her smile a polished mask. To family, she said, her voice ringing like a bell clear but hollow, to patience and to keeping things civil. The words were a barb aimed at me, though her eyes avoided mine. Nathan let out a nervous chuckle, his fingers tightening around his own glass, while Henry barely looked up. Amy's brow furrowed, her lips parting as if to speak, but she held back her eyes, locking onto mine for a moment too long. I gave her a small nod, a silent promise that I was still here, still awake. Pauline drank her throat, moving as she swallowed, and I watched my own glass raised, but untouched. The air grew heavier, as if the house itself were leaning in its shadows, lengthening, curling around the edges of the table, like fingers ready to snatch secrets from the light. I felt it then, a stir deep within me. Not just anger or hurt, but something older. Something that tasted of earth and iron, like the spring water from the well out back. It was as if the house and I were one, its roots entwined with mine, its history whispering through my veins. My grandmother's stories echoed in my mind, tales of women who'd lived here before women who'd faced betrayal and turned it into power, their strength etched into the very beams of this place. The dinner began the clink of silverware and the murmur of conversation filling the room, but it was a fragile performance. They talked of schools, of Henry's internship, of a vacation planned for July. Trivial things, safe things. None of them about me. Pauline played her part flawlessly. Her laughter light, her comments carefully curated. But I saw the cracks. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass again, her fingers brushing the rim, where a faint smear of her lipstick lingered. She didn't know what I'd done, didn't know the water she sipped was her own trap turned against her. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes tracing the patterns in the table's grain, each swirl a story of its own, older than any of us. The house had seen dinners like this before, generations of gatherings, some joyous, some laced with deceit. I wondered if it had always known, if it had watched my grandmother and her mother before her, waiting for the moment one of us would rise. Tonight, it was me. The spark I'd felt in the kitchen had grown a quiet flame that warmed my chest, steadying my breath. I wasn't just Iris Lorne, the widow, the mother, the grandmother who paid the bills. I was something more, something the house recognized, something Pauline and Nathan had underestimated. 20 minutes passed, marked by the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum swaying like a metronome, counting down to the inevitable. Pauline's movements grew sluggish, her blinks longer, her fork pausing mid-air as if she'd forgotten its purpose. She rubbed her temple, a faint crease forming between her brows, and took another sip of water, her hand unsteady. The candles flickered their flames, dipping as if bowing to the moment, and the shadows seemed to thicken, pooling around her chair like ink. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice soft, almost kind, but laced with a thread of steel I hadn't known I possessed. The words felt like a spell binding the moment, and the house seemed to hum in response, a low, resonant note that only I could hear. "Fine." Pauline mumbled, her voice slurring just enough to draw attention. "Just tired." She forced a smile, but it faltered, her eyes glazing over as she leaned back in her chair. Henry glanced up his phone, forgotten for the first time all evening. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp with concern. Amy's hands froze on her napkin, her gaze flicking to me again, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. Nathan sat rigid, his knuckles white around his fork, his eyes darting between Pauline and me, as if he could sense the shift in the air but didn't dare name it. I rose slowly, my movements deliberate, and picked up Pauline's glass. The room seemed to hold its breath, the candles flickering wildly now, their light casting strange patterns on the walls, patterns that looked almost like faces watching, waiting. I carried the glass to the kitchen, my steps measured the floorboards, silent beneath me, as if the house itself were shielding my actions. In the dim light of the kitchen, I poured the remaining water down the drain, watching it spiral away like a secret being swallowed by the earth. The cracked mirror above the stove caught my reflection again, and this time I saw something new, a glint in my eyes, a curve to my lips that wasn't just a smile, but a claim. I returned to the dining room, empty-handed, my face a mask of calm. Pauline had slumped sideways in her chair, her breath shallow, her face pale as the bone china on the table. Henry was on his feet now, his voice rising. "Mom, what's wrong?" Amy gasped, her hands covering her mouth, but she didn't move, her eyes locked on me, as if she knew this was no accident. Nathan stood his chair, scraping against the floor, his voice tight. "Pauline, can you hear me?" He touched her shoulder, shaking her gently, but she didn't respond, her head lolling to one side. The room erupted into chaos. Henry fumbling for his phone to call an ambulance, Amy whispering, "Grandma, what's happening?" But I remained still, an anchor in the storm, my heart steady, my mind clear. The house hummed again, louder this time, a vibration that seemed to pulse through the walls, the floor, the very air. It wasn't just approval now, it was acknowledgement, as if the spirits of the women who'd come before me were nodding, their voices woven into the woodwork. I felt them, their strength, their resolve, their refusal to be erased. They'd faced their own battles in this house, and now it was my turn. "Call for help," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the panic. Henry nodded, already dialing, while Nathan hovered over Pauline, his hands shaking. I stepped closer, placing a hand on Amy's shoulder, grounding her, grounding myself. "It'll be okay," I said, and she nodded. Though her eyes held questions she wasn't ready to ask. The ambulance arrived quickly, its sirens slicing through the night, a sharp contrast to the quiet hum of the house. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, checking Pauline's pulse, her breathing, asking questions no one could fully answer. "Exhaustion," maybe one of them said, glancing at Nathan, "or low blood sugar. We'll know more at the hospital." They didn't look at the glass, didn't suspect anything beyond a fainting spell, and I didn't offer more. The house kept my secret, its shadows folding around me like a cloak. As they carried Pauline out on a stretcher, her face pale but peaceful, Nathan followed his shoulders, hunched, his eyes avoiding mine. Henry trailed behind, still clutching his phone, while Amy stayed close, her hand brushing mine, as if seeking reassurance. The dining room was empty now, the candles burned low, their wax pooling like tears on the tablecloth. I stood alone, the silence settling around me, not heavy, but full like the quiet after a storm has passed. I walked Nathan to the door, the porch light casting a soft glow over his face, making him look younger, more like the boy I'd raised than the man who'd stood by while his wife tried to silence me. "You should rest too, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I will," I replied, my tone even unyielding. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, to explain, to excuse. I didn't give him the chance. I heard you. I said the words, simple but sharp. A blade slipped between us. His face froze, his breath catching, and then he turned and walked into the night, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed was different, not empty, but alive, filled with the house's low hum, the echo of my own heartbeat. I returned to the dining room, my fingers trailing over the table, the chairs the remnants of a meal no one had finished. The roast was cold now, the green beans limp, but Amy's napkin caught my eye, folded into a perfect triangle, a small act of care in a night of chaos. I picked it up, holding it like a talisman, and felt the house settle around me, its presence warm, protective. I didn't feel guilt. That surprised me. I'd expected a tremor, a doubt, but instead there was only clarity, sharp and bright, like the edge of a knife. The cracked mirror in the kitchen had shown me something tonight, not just my reflection, but my truth. I wasn't just Iris, the widow, the mother, the grandmother. I was a woman who'd been betrayed, who'd been used, but who was no longer willing to bend. The house knew it too. Its hum grew softer, a lullaby now, as if it were saying, "You've begun. Keep going." I cleared the table slowly, deliberately, each plate a step toward reclaiming my space. Pauline's perfume lingered in the air, sharp and floral, a reminder of her presence. But it was fading, overpowered by the scent of the earth that clung to my hands, the rosemary I'd crushed earlier, the life I was taking back. I washed the dishes in the kitchen, the cracked mirror watching its surface, glinting with something that wasn't just light. It was power, ancient and patient, waiting for me to claim it fully. As I turned off the kitchen light, the house seemed to exhale, its shadows softening, its hum fading into a quiet promise. This was only the beginning. Pauline's collapse was not the end of the story, but a spark, a signal that the woman I'd been was waking up. And whatever came next, I would face it not as a victim, but as a force rooted in this house, in its secrets, in the strength of the women who'd come before me. The night was mine now, and so was the fight. The house was quiet now, but it wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of presence, heavy with secrets, and the weight of truths finally spoken. I stood in the kitchen, the last of the dishes dried, and stacked the cracked mirror above the stove, glinting faintly in the moonlight that spilled through the window. Its jagged lines seemed to pulse, a fracture that mirrored the one running through my family, through my heart. The events of the evening, Pauline's collapse, Nathan's frozen panic. The hum of the house as it bore witness lingered like a storm's aftermath, the air charged with what had been and what was yet to come. I moved to the living room, my bare feet silent on the oak floors, each step a communion with the house that had held me through decades of love and loss. The candles from dinner had burned out, leaving pools of wax on the tablecloth, like tears frozen in time. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one with the peeling armrest that Pauline had always sneered at, and let the darkness settle around me. The house hummed softly, a low vibration that seemed to rise from its foundations, as if it were whispering to me, urging me to see what I'd ignored for too long. I'd always thought of family as a tapestry, woven with threads of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. But tonight, I saw the truth. My threads had been pulled loose, used to patch holes in lives that no longer included me. Nathan, my only son, and Pauline, his wife, had taken my generosity and turned it into a chain binding me to their needs while dismissing my presence. The glass I'd switched was only the latest betrayal, a sharp note in a song that had been playing for years, its melody subtle but relentless. I closed my eyes. And the memories came unbidden, vivid, as the visions my grandmother used to describe flashes of insight she claimed came from the house itself, from the women who'd lived here before us. I saw myself years ago signing checks in this very room, the ink smudging under my fingers, as I paid for Nathan's house, their car, Henry's school fees. I'd done it, without question, believing it was my role, my duty as a mother, a widow, a keeper of the family's roots. But each check had been a silent surrender, a piece of myself given away to buy a place at a table where I was no longer welcome. Pauline's voice echoed in my mind not from tonight, but from years past, her corrections slicing through me like a blade wrapped in silk. "It's salmon, Iris, not salmon," she'd say, her smile tight, her tone dripping with condescension. "Croissant, not crescent. Small things, petty things, but they'd accumulated, each one a pebble in a pile that had grown into a wall. She'd come from money, not old, rooted wealth like this house, but flashy, fleeting money, the kind that bought designer clothes and spa visits, but never paid the bills on time. And Nathan, my Nathan, had let her build that wall, smoothing over her slights with excuses. "She's just stressed, Mom. You're being too sensitive. Let's not make a thing of it." I hadn't made a thing of it, not then. I'd swallowed the hurt, signed another check, covered another debt. Because Nathan was my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after Elias died. I'd thought if I kept giving, I'd stay needed, stay wanted. But tonight, the truth was undeniable. They didn't want me. They wanted my silence, my money, my absence. The glass in the dining room had been their final move, a potion to render me invisible to ensure their evening went smoothly without my opinions. The house hummed again louder now, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself, from the roots of the ancient oak that shaded the backyard. I opened my eyes, and the room felt different, alive, in a way I hadn't noticed before. The shadows moved not with the wind, but with intent curling around the edges of the furniture like tendrils of smoke. I stood drawn to the hallway where a narrow door led to the attic, a place I hadn't visited in years. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind her stories of the women who'd lived here, women who'd faced their own betrayals and found strength in the house's embrace. "This place holds our secrets, Iris." She'd said, her eyes gleaming with something I hadn't understood then. "It holds our power, too." I climbed the attic stairs, the wood creaking under my weight, each step a journey into the past. The air was thick with dust and memory, the faint scent of lavender lingering from sachets my mother had tucked among her things. In the corner beneath the tarp sat an old chest, its surface carved with the same vine patterns as the silver tray in the kitchen. I knelt before it, my fingers tracing the carvings, feeling a warmth that shouldn't have been there, as if the wood were alive, responding to my touch. Inside the chest were relics of my family's history, my grandmother's shawl, my mother's recipe book, a locket with a portrait of a woman I didn't recognize, but whose eyes mirrored mine. And beneath it all, a journal, its leather cover worn but intact, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it, and my grandmother's handwriting greeted me strong and flowing like the script of a spell. To the women of this house, the first page read, "Your strength is not in what you give, but in what you keep. Trust the house. It sees what you cannot." I read on, the words pulling me into a story I'd only half remembered. My grandmother wrote of her own betrayal, a sister who'd schemed to take her inheritance, a husband who'd turned away when she needed him most. She'd found solace in this house, in its whispers, in the way it seemed to guide her hand when she faced her enemies. "The house is alive," she wrote, "not with ghosts, but with us, with every choice we make to stand tall. It holds our anger, our grief, our power. Listen to it, Iris." I closed the journal, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with recognition. The house had been watching all along, its hum, a call to action, its shadows, a shield. I'd spent years giving money, time, love, believing it would bind my family to me. But Nathan and Pauline had taken it all not out of need, but out of entitlement, their gratitude, a performance that faded when the checks stopped coming. I'd paid for their house, a sleek, modern thing that lacked the soul of this one. I'd covered Henry's school fees when their credit cards were declined, paid off debts they never acknowledged, all because I thought it was my place. My mistake was thinking love could be bought, that generosity would earn me a seat at their table. The attic grew warmer, the air shimmering faintly as if the house were breathing with me. I stood clutching the journal and descended the stairs, my steps surer now. The living room was unchanged, but the shadows seemed to follow me, gathering at the edges of my vision, whispering encouragement. I sat again, the journal in my lap, and let the memories flood back, each one sharper, now illuminated by the truth I'd ignored. I remembered the Christmas card they'd sent without my name, the neighbors they'd told I was just a friend helping with childcare, the holidays planned without a thought for my presence. Pauline's corrections weren't just about pronunciation. They were about erasing me, piece by piece, until I was nothing but a wallet, a convenience, a shadow in their story. And Nathan, my son, had let it happen, his silence louder than her words, his excuses a betrayal of their own. The house hummed again, and this time I felt it in my chest, a vibration that matched the rhythm of my pulse. The shadows moved closer, forming shapes that weren't quite human, but felt familiar, like echoes of the women in my grandmother's journal. I wasn't alone in this. The house was with me, its power rooted in the earth, in the spring well, in the oak tree outside. It had seen my grandmother's strength, my mother's resilience, and now it saw mine. I thought of Amy, her quiet kindness, her folded napkin, her eyes that saw me when no one else did. She was different, untouched by the greed that had tainted Nathan and Pauline. I wondered if the house saw her too, if it recognized the spark in her, the potential to carry its legacy forward. The thought brought a flicker of warmth, a counterpoint to the cold clarity of my realizations. I opened the journal again, flipping to a page near the end. My grandmother had written a list not of tasks or debts, but of promises to herself. I will not shrink. I will not beg. I will hold my ground, and the house will hold me. I traced the words with my finger, feeling their weight, their truth. I'd spent years shrinking, begging for a place in my son's life, giving until I was hollow. But no more. The glass I'd switched was just the beginning, a small act of defiance that had awakened something deeper, something the house had been waiting for. The moonlight shifted, casting a silver glow across the room, and the shadows seemed to nod, their forms dissolving into the walls. The hum softened a lullaby now, but its message was clear. I was not alone. The house was my ally, its power mine, to wield its secrets mine to uncover. I closed the journal and stood my reflection catching in the window, not cracked like the mirror, but whole, strong, alive. I thought of the money I'd given, the years I'd spent trying to buy love, and the betrayal that had finally broken the spell. Nathan and Pauline had taken my generosity and turned it into a weapon, but they'd underestimated me, underestimated this house, underestimated the women who'd come before. I wasn't just Iris Lorne, the widow who paid the bills. I was a keeper of this place, a bearer of its strength, and I was done being used. The night stretched on the house, settling around me, its hum a quiet promise. I didn't know what came next, not fully, but I knew this: I would not be silenced again. The glass had been my first act, but it wouldn't be my last. The house and I, we were awake now, and together we would write the rest of this story. The morning after this dinner was sharp with clarity, like the first frost of autumn cutting through the haze of summer. I woke before dawn, not startled, but summoned, as if the house itself had nudged me awake. Its hum was softer now, a steady pulse beneath the floorboards, a reminder that I was not alone in what I'd done or what I was about to do. The cracked mirror in the kitchen had shown me my truth last night, and the journal in the attic had whispered of my strength. Today, I would wield it. I dressed in soft slacks and a cardigan, pinning my husband's old brooch to my chest, a silver crescent moon, its edges worn but glowing faintly in the dim light as if it carried a piece of the house's magic. The air was cool, the garden outside still cloaked in shadow, but I felt alive, electric, as if the roots of the ancient oak in the backyard had threaded themselves through my veins. I made tea, the kettle's whistle harmonizing with the house's hum, and sat by the window watching the world wake. The garden needed weeding, but I let it be. Today was for something else. My phone buzzed at 9:17 a.m., a message from Amy, her words bright but cautious. "Grandma, is everything okay?" That was so weird last night. Dad said Pauline fainted because she hadn't eaten, but I don't know. She looked strange. "You okay?" I smiled, my heart warming at her concern, the only thread of family that still felt true. I typed back, "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Thank you for checking." Something was strange, yes. I paused, then added, "We'll talk soon." Not yet. Not in a text. She deserved the truth in person, face to face, where the house could bear witness. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a pale glow across the kitchen table. My bank accounts were a map of my sacrifices, each transaction a marker of the years I'd spent trying to buy love. 3 accounts savings checking, and one I hadn't touched in over a year. A relic from when Elias and I planned a future that never came. My name was on every document, but Nathan's was on too many, linked to payments I'd automated without question: cell phones, car insurance, school fees, even a gym membership I'd never used. The numbers stared back at me, stark and unyielding, a ledger of my generosity and their entitlement. The house hummed again, louder now, a vibration that seemed to rise from the earth itself, urging me forward. I picked up the phone, my hands steady, and dialed the bank. The line rang once, twice, then a young woman's voice answered bright as morning. "Good morning, Ms. Lorne. This is Colleen at First Carolina Federal. How can I assist you today?" I paused, my fingers resting on a notepad where I'd scribbled every recurring payment I could remember. The handwriting was mine, but it looked different, bolder, as if the house had guided my pen. "Yes, hello," I said, my voice clear, unshaken. "I need to review some authorizations on my accounts. I'd like to suspend a number of automatic transfers, possibly all of them." There was a beat of silence. Then Colleen's tone shifted, more serious. "Of course, Ms. Lorne. May I verify your identity first?" We went through the ritual, last 4 digits of my social security. Elias's name. The answer to a security question I'd set years ago. "What was the name of your first pet?" "Luna." I said the word, stirring a memory of a gray cat who'd slept in the shadow of the oak tree, her eyes glinting like the brooch I wore now. The house seemed to nod its hum, softening as if approving the memory. "Perfect," Colleen said. "I see you have 3 active accounts with us. There are currently 72 automatic transactions scheduled. Would you like to cancel specific ones or suspend everything for now?" Everything, I said, the word ringing like a bell, final and unyielding. I almost didn't recognize my own voice. Its steadiness, a contrast to the tremor I had expected. The house hummed in agreement, a low, resonant note that vibrated through the table, the chair, my very bones. "All right, Colleen replied, her voice now measured. I'm initiating a suspension of all scheduled payments effective immediately. They'll be paused until we receive further instructions from you in writing or in person. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the phone. It was done. No fanfare, no confrontation, just a quiet call to a stranger, a flip of a switch in some distant system. And yet it felt monumental, as if I'd severed a chain that had bound me for years. The house exhaled its shadows, softening, curling around me like a protective cloak. I felt it then, a surge of power, not loud or violent, but deep-rooted, like the oak tree outside its branches, whispering secrets to the wind. By noon, the first text came from Nathan. Hey, Mom, did something happen with the phone plan? Mine's not working. I didn't answer. Let him wonder. I made a sandwich, turkey and cheese, nothing fancy, and took it to the porch, settling into the wicker chair with the peeling armrest. Pauline had always made a face at it, her lips curling as if its imperfection offended her. Funny, I thought, how that armrest had outlasted her schemes. The air was warm, heavy with the promise of September rain, and I watched a neighbor mow his lawn in slow, careful stripes, the rhythm grounding me. Elias used to mow like that, deliberate, precise, his hands steady as he shaped the world around him. He'd warned me once, his voice gentle but firm. Iris. If they only come around when there's a check involved, they're not visiting you. They're visiting the money. I'd brushed it off, then called him cynical, but now I saw it. He wasn't cynical. He was tired. Tired of watching me give pieces of myself away. I wondered what he'd say now if he could see me sitting here, the brooch glinting on my chest, the house humming at my side. He'd smile. I thought that half smile that hid 1,000 secrets and say, "About time, Iris." The doorbell rang at 2:00 p.m., sharp and insistent, pulling me from my thoughts. I knew it was Nathan before I opened the door. The hum of the house shifting to a warning note, low and steady. He stood on the porch, his shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes shadowed with something that wasn't quite guilt, but wasn't innocence either. "Mom," he said, stepping inside before I could invite him. His presence an intrusion in a space I was reclaiming. "I need to ask you something." I didn't offer him a seat, didn't move from the doorway. My arms folded the brooch, catching the light like a talisman. The shadows in the room seemed to gather, pooling at the edges, watching him as closely as I did. "Did you talk to the bank?" he asked. His voice carrying a note of disbelief, as if the idea of me taking control was unthinkable. "I did," I said simply, my tone even unyielding. His face flickered irritation, confusion, something deeper I couldn't name before settling into the careful mask he used with clients, his hands clasped together like a plea. "Mom, Pauline's been under a lot of stress lately." He began his words, practiced, rehearsed. She didn't mean anything by what she said last night. It was just poor wording. She was nervous about the evening going smoothly. That's all. Poor wording. I repeated, my voice low, cutting through his excuses like a blade. The house hummed louder now, its shadows shifting as if urging me to press harder. "She put something in my glass, Nathan," without telling me, "to keep me quiet." He hesitated, his eyes widening a crack in his composure. "It wasn't like that," he said quickly. "She didn't drug you. You're jumping to conclusions. It was just a supplement. Melatonin, maybe. She thought it might help you relax." "Relax," I said, stepping closer, the brooch glinting like a warning. "She thought drugging me would make your evening easier. And you stood there, Nathan. You heard her, and you didn't stop her." He exhaled, his shoulders sagging, but he didn't deny it. "Okay, yes." He admitted, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "That part wasn't great. I'm not saying it was the right call, but we thought, these dinners get tense. You know how you get, how I get, how I get. I interrupted, my voice steady but sharp, the house's hum rising to match it. I paid for your house, Nathan. The down payment, the mortgage for 6 years. I paid for Henry's school, your insurance, Pauline's medical bills. I paid for your groceries when your card was declined last spring. I know because the bank called me. If I made a few comments over dinner, I think I earned the right. His mouth opened, then closed, his eyes dropping to the floor. The shadows seemed to close in their edges sharper now, as if the house were judging him too. You've taken my money, I said, my voice a quiet storm, and in return, you tried to put me to sleep like an inconvenient child. It wasn't like that. He said, his tone desperate now, but he didn't meet my eyes. Was it your idea? I asked, my words precise cutting. Or did you just let her say it and stay quiet? He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of his complicity. The house's hum grew louder, a vibration that seemed to shake the air, and I felt it in my chest. A power that wasn't just mine, but belonged to the women who'd stood in this room before me, who'd faced their own betrayals and refused to bend. I'm cutting myself loose, I said finally. My voice clear, final. The tea kettle began to whistle a sharp note that echoed the house's approval. I turned, calmly pouring myself a cup, leaving Nathan standing in the living room, his presence diminished in the space I was reclaiming. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him, and the house settled its hum, softening to a lullaby. I sat at the kitchen table, the steam from my tea curling upward like a quiet goodbye. The brooch on my chest seemed to glow faintly, its silver catching the light in a way that felt alive, as if it too were part of this moment, part of my awakening. I opened the journal again, my grandmother's words a beacon in the dim light. The house will show you the way she'd written, but you must choose to walk it. I was choosing now not just to walk, but to run, to claim the power I had buried under years of giving. The shadows in the room seemed to nod, their forms less distinct, but no less present, a reminder that I was not alone. I thought of Amy, her message still glowing on my phone, her quiet strength a mirror to my own. She'd seen Pauline's cruelty long before I had noticed it when she was just 10, when Pauline dismissed a sweater I'd given her as not her style. I'd nodded, then swallowed the hurt, but Amy had remembered. She deserved to know the truth, to know the woman I was becoming, the woman the house was helping me find. By evening, I walked to the garden, the oak tree looming like a sentinel in the fading light. Its roots seemed to pulse beneath the earth in sync with the house's hum, and I knelt, pressing my hands to the soil. It was warm, alive, as if the house extended beyond its walls, into the ground and into me. I felt it then, a connection not just to the house, but to the women who'd come before, their strength, flowing through me like sap through a tree. I returned inside the journal tucked under my arm and made a list not of payments, but of promises. To myself, to the house, to the legacy I was reclaiming. I will not be used. I will not be silenced. I will hold my ground, and the house will hold me. The words felt like a spell, each one binding me to the power I was only beginning to understand. The phone rang again as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan's number flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, the house's hum drowning out the sound, its shadows curling around me like a shield. I didn't need his explanations, his excuses. I had the house, the journal, the brooch, and the truth. And that was enough. The morning light poured through the kitchen window, soft and golden, as if the house itself were exhaling warmth after the storm of the past days. I stood at the sink, my hands submerged in soapy water, washing the last of the bone china from that fateful dinner. The cracked mirror above the stove caught my reflection, its jagged line no longer a fracture, but a seam stitching together the woman I'd been with, the one I was becoming. The house hummed softly, a low vibration that seemed to rise from its roots, entwining with my own grounding me in this moment of quiet rebellion. I'd spent years shrinking myself, folding my desires into the corners of this house to make room for Nathan, Pauline, and their endless needs. But now, with the bank transfer suspended and the truth of their betrayal laid bare, I felt a shift not just in me, but in the house itself. Its walls seemed to stand taller, its shadows deeper, as if it too was shedding the weight of their presence. I dried my hands and pinned Elias's silver crescent brooch to my sweater, its faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat, a reminder of the power I was beginning to claim. The dining room was first. Pauline's touch was everywhere, her sleek gray curtains, heavy and joyless, blocking the light. Her crystal vase, a gift she'd given with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, perched on the sideboard like a sentinel of her control. I started with the curtains, tugging them down, with a strength that surprised me, the fabric pooling on the floor like shed skin. The windows yawned open, letting in a breeze that carried the scent of earth and wildflowers from the garden. The house exhaled its hum, rising to a soft melody as if it approved. I carried the curtains to the back porch, tossing them into a pile for donation. They didn't belong here, not anymore. The house was mine, its history, mine, its stories woven through my grandmother's journal, through the women who'd lived here before me. I returned to the dining room, my eyes scanning for more of Pauline's influence. The vase was next, its cold crystal catching the light but giving nothing back. I wrapped it in newspaper, my movements deliberate, and set it in a box by the door. Each act felt like a spell, a reclamation, and the house seemed to hum louder, its shadows curling around me like a protective embrace. I moved to the living room where a stack of glossy magazines Pauline's subscriptions sent here because their apartment lacked space cluttered the coffee table. I gathered them, their covers screaming of trends and diets, and added them to the box. The room felt lighter already, as if I were peeling away layers of someone else's life to reveal my own. I paused at the bookshelf, my fingers trailing over volumes I hadn't touched in years. My mother's poetry, Elias's worn copy of Moby Dick, a gardening guide I'd loved as a girl. These were mine, not props for Pauline's staged family dinners. The house's hum grew stronger, and I felt a pull, a whisper from the walls guiding me back to the attic. I climbed the stairs, the air thick with dust and memory, and knelt before the carved chest again. The journal was still there, its leather warm under my touch, but I noticed something new, a small velvet pouch tucked beneath it, its drawstring tied with a knot that seemed to pulse faintly like the brooch. I opened it, and inside was a key old and iron, its handle shaped like a vine. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been, and it hummed in my hand, syncing with the house's rhythm. I turned it over, my fingers tracing its curves, and felt a spark, a memory that wasn't mine. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, clear as if she were standing beside me. The house holds our secrets, Iris. But it also holds our keys. Find yours. I clutched the key, my heart pounding, and descended the stairs, the shadows following their forms, less distinct but no less present. The key felt alive, a piece of the house's magic, a promise of something waiting to be unlocked. Back in the kitchen, I set the key on the table and opened the journal to a new page, one my grandmother hadn't written on. I took a pen and began a list not of debts or payments, but of desires, small and large, that I'd buried under years of giving. Plant wildflowers in the garden, bake bread for myself, sew a quilt from Elias's old shirts, write to Mabel. The words flowed, each one a reclamation, a step toward the Iris I'd forgotten. The house hummed in approval, its shadows softening as if the act of writing were a ritual binding me to its power. By noon, I was in the garden, my hands deep in the soil pulling weeds that had grown unchecked for too long. The oak tree loomed above its branches, swaying gently, its roots pulsing beneath the earth. I felt it, a connection that went beyond the physical, as if the tree and the house were one, their strength flowing into me. I planted a row of wildflower seeds, lupine, black-eyed, Susan, coneflower, each one a promise to myself to let something wild and free take root. The key lay in my pocket, its weight a reminder of the mysteries still to be uncovered, the power still to be claimed. Amy arrived in the afternoon, her knock soft but certain. I opened the door and she stepped inside, her eyes bright but shadowed with worry. "Grandma," she said, hugging me tightly, her warmth a contrast to the cool air of the house. "I've been thinking about you all day. Last night was weird. I'm glad you're okay." I smiled, leading her to the kitchen where I'd set out tea and a plate of shortbread I'd baked that morning. The house seemed to welcome her, its hum softening to a gentle lullaby, as if it recognized her as one of its own. "I'm more than okay, Amy," I said, pouring her a cup. "I'm awake." She tilted her head, her eyes searching mine, and I saw it then, the same spark I'd felt in myself, the same connection to this place. "What happened?" She asked, her voice soft but insistent. "Pauline's in the hospital, but Dad says it's just exhaustion." I don't believe him. "I saw you, Grandma. You were so calm, like you knew something." I hesitated, the key in my pocket, pulsing faintly as if urging me to speak. The house's shadows gathered, not threatening but protective, a circle around us. I heard them. "Amy," I said, my voice steady, the words a release. "Pauline and your father. They planned to put something in my drink to keep me quiet during dinner." I switched the glasses, her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she nodded as if a piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. "I knew something was off," she said. "She's always been controlling. The way she talks to you like you're not even there. I've seen it since I was little." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, and felt the house hum in approval, its shadows softening around her. "You've always seen me," I said, my voice thick with emotion, even when they didn't. We talked for hours, the tea growing cold, the shortbread untouched. I told her about the years of giving money, time, love, only to be met with dismissal about the checks I had signed, the debts I had paid, the slights I had swallowed. I told her about the journal, the chest, the key, though I didn't show it to her yet. It felt too soon, too sacred a secret the house wasn't ready to share. Amy listened, her eyes bright with understanding, her questions sharp but kind. She didn't judge, didn't doubt, and I felt a bond forming stronger than the one I'd lost with Nathan, rooted in truth and mutual respect. As the sun dipped low, painting the kitchen in hues of amber and rose, I showed her the garden, the wildflower seeds I'd planted. She knelt beside me, her hands brushing the soil, and I saw it again, the spark, the connection to this place. "You belong here, Amy," I said, my voice soft but certain. "This house, it sees you too." She smiled a little shy, but there was strength in it, a mirror to my own. "I've always loved it here," she said. "It feels alive, like it's watching us." "It is." I said, the key in my pocket, humming faintly as if in agreement. I didn't tell her about the journal's words or the women who'd come before, but I knew she'd learn in time. The house would show her as it was showing me. That evening, I began sewing a project I'd abandoned years ago when Pauline had called my quilts old-fashioned. I pulled Elias's shirts from a box in the closet, their fabric soft with memory, and cut them into squares, each one a piece of our life together. The sewing room, once a guest room for Nathan's visits, was mine again, its walls bare of Pauline's sterile art prints. I hung a small tapestry I'd woven as a girl, its threads vibrant with blues and greens, a reminder of the Iris who'd dreamed before she learned to sacrifice. The house hummed as I worked its shadows dancing across the walls, forming patterns that weren't quite random vines, faces, hands reaching out. I felt them, the women of my grandmother's journal, their presence woven into the fabric of this place. The key lay on the table beside me, its iron glinting in the lamplight, and I wondered what it opened, what secret it held. A door, a chest, a truth. The house wasn't ready to tell me yet, but I trusted. It trusted the hum, the shadows, the strength that was growing inside me. By nightfall, I'd finished a single quilt square, a patchwork of Elias's shirts, and my mother's old tablecloth, a blend of past and present. I held it up the fabric warm in my hands and felt a surge of pride, not for the work, but for what it meant. This was mine, my time, my space, my life. The house's hum rose a chorus now, and the shadows seemed to nod their forms clearer for a moment, like women standing shoulder to shoulder. I wrote to Mabel before bed a letter on creamy stationery I'd found in the attic, its edges embossed with the same vine pattern as the chest. Dear Mabel, I wrote, it's been too long. I'm finding myself again here in the house we both love. Tell me your stories. I want to hear them. I sealed it the act a promise to reconnect not just with my cousin, but with the Iris I'd buried under years of giving. As I turned off the light, the house settled around me, its hum a lullaby, its shadows a shield. The key on the table glowed faintly a beacon in the dark, and I felt the weight of my choices not heavy, but empowering. I was reclaiming my space, my identity, piece by piece. And the house was with me, its magic alive in every creak, every shadow, every beat of my heart. Nathan and Pauline's betrayal had awakened me, but it was the house, the journal, the key, and Amy's quiet strength that were guiding me forward. I wasn't done yet, but I was beginning, and that was enough. The dawn was gentle, a soft blush of pink creeping over the horizon, painting the garden in hues that felt like a promise. I stood at the kitchen window, the iron key from the attic resting in my palm, its weight a quiet anchor. The house hummed beneath my feet, a low, steady pulse that seemed to sync with my heartbeat, as if it were whispering, "You're not alone." The silver crescent brooch pinned to my blouse gleamed faintly, catching the first rays of light, and I felt it a connection not just to the house, but to the women who'd lived here before me, their strength woven into its walls, its roots, its secrets. I'd spent the night dreaming of doors, each one locked, each one waiting for the key in my hand. My grandmother's journal had hinted at such things, its pages filled with cryptic notes about unlocking what's hidden and trusting the house to guide. I didn't know what the key opened not yet, but its hum was a call, a summons to keep moving forward to reclaim what was mine. The events of the dinner, the switched glasses and the confrontation with Nathan had cracked open a door inside me, one I'd kept shut for years. Today, I would widen it not just for myself, but for Amy, the only one who saw me as more than a means to an end. Amy arrived at mid-morning, her knock a soft rhythm that echoed the house's hum. I opened the door and she stepped inside, her eyes bright but shadowed with questions. "Grandma," she said, hugging me tightly, her warmth a stark contrast to the cool air of the house. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about the glasses, about everything." I led her to the living room where I'd set out a tray of tea and the shortbread we hadn't touched the day before. The house seemed to welcome her, its shadows softening, curling around her like a gentle embrace. I sat across from her, the key now on the table between us, its iron glinting in the sunlight. Amy's eyes flicked to it, her brow furrowing, but she didn't ask, not yet. She was waiting for me to lead, trusting me in a way Nathan never had. "I need to tell you the whole truth," I said, my voice steady, the words a release. The house hummed in approval, its vibration rising as if it were listening too. That night, when I heard Pauline and your father talking, it wasn't just about the glass. It was about years of being used, of giving everything money, time, love, and getting nothing but silence in return. I switched the glasses because I was done being invisible. Amy's eyes widened, but there was no shock, only understanding. I knew something was wrong. She said, her voice soft but firm. "I've seen it for years, Grandma. The way Pauline talks over you, the way Dad just lets her. I remember when I was 10, she laughed at that scarf you knitted for me, said it was charming. In that way she has, like, it's a joke. I kept it anyway. I still wear it." I smiled, my heart swelling at her words, at the memory of that scarf, blue and green, like the tapestry in the sewing room. "You've always seen me, Amy," I said, reaching for her hand, even when I didn't see myself. She squeezed my hand, her grip strong, and I felt it a spark, a connection that went beyond blood, beyond words. The house's hum grew louder, the shadows shifting, forming fleeting shapes, vines, hands, faces that seemed to nod in approval. "What happens now?" Amy asked, her eyes flicking to the key again. "What did you do after the dinner?" I told her about the bank, about suspending the payments that had tethered me to Nathan and Pauline's life. I told her about the journal, about my grandmother's words, about the house's hum, and the power I was beginning to feel. I didn't mention the key's glow or the dreams of locked doors, not yet. Those were secrets the house wasn't ready to share, and I trusted its timing. "You're different now," Amy said, her voice quiet but certain. "I can feel it. Like you're stronger. Like the house is part of you. It is—" I said the words, a truth I hadn't fully grasped until now. "And you're part of it, too. This place, it's more than wood and stone. It's us, our stories, our strength. I want you to know that, Amy. I want you to carry it." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded, her jaw set, and I saw it, the spark I'd felt in myself mirrored in her. The house hummed a chorus now, and I knew it saw her too, recognized her as one of its own. We spent the afternoon in the garden planting more wildflower seeds, our hands working side by side in the soil. The oak tree loomed above, its branches swaying gently, its roots pulsing beneath the earth in sync with the house's hum. Amy laughed as we worked, her voice light but strong, and I felt the years of distance between us dissolve. This was what family could be, not obligation, not exploitation, but a shared rhythm, a mutual respect. As the sun dipped low, I made a decision. "Amy," I said, brushing dirt from my hands, "there's something I need to do, for both of us. Will you come with me tomorrow to see a lawyer?" Her eyes widened, but she nodded. "Of course, Grandma, whatever you need." The next morning, we drove to town, the key in my pocket, the journal tucked into my bag. The lawyer's office was small, but warm. Its walls lined with books and certificates, a stark contrast to the sleek sterility of Pauline's world. Mr. Hargrove, a man with kind eyes and a handshake that felt like trust, greeted us with a smile. "Iris," he said, gesturing to 2 chairs across from his desk. "It's been a while. What brings you here?" I sat, Amy beside me, the key pulsing faintly in my pocket. The house's hum, a distant echo. "I need to revise my will," I said, my voice clear, unyielding. "And I need to set up a trust." "For Amy." Mr. Hargrove raised an eyebrow, but he didn't question me, only nodded and pulled out a notepad. "Let's start with the will," he said. "Who's currently listed as beneficiary and power of attorney Nathan." I said the name heavy, but no longer painful. I want him removed. I want Amy to take his place. Amy's breath caught her hand, reaching for mine under the table. I squeezed it, grounding her, grounding myself. The house's hum was faint here, but I felt it still a reminder that I was not alone. And the trust Mr. Hargrove asked, his pen poised. For Amy, I said, to cover her education, her future, whatever she chooses. But it's hers alone, not to be touched by anyone else in the family. Mr. Hargrove nodded, scribbling notes, his expression calm, but curious. This is a significant change, Iris. May I ask what prompted it? I hesitated, the key in my pocket, humming softly as if urging me to speak. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, not as strong as in the house, but present, watching. I've been giving too much for too long, I said finally, to people who didn't value it. I want to protect what's mine, and I want to protect Amy. Amy's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak, only squeezed my hand tighter. Mr. Hargrove nodded, his smile softening. I understand. Let's get this drafted. It'll take a few days, but I'll ensure it's airtight. We spent an hour going over details, assets, accounts, the house itself. I hadn't realized how much I owned, how much I'd built over the years with Elias, how much I'd given away. The house was the heart of it, not just a home, but a legacy, its roots deep in the earth, its secrets locked in the key I carried. I didn't mention the key to Mr. Hargrove, but I felt its weight, its promise, as we spoke. As we left the office, Amy hugged me again, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Thank you, Grandma. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I said, smoothing her hair. Just be you. That's enough. We drove back in silence, the key humming softly, the journal in my bag, a quiet companion. The house greeted us as we entered its hum, rising to meet us, its shadows curling around Amy, as if claiming her too. I showed her the journal, letting her read my grandmother's words, watching her eyes widen at the stories of women who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger. This is us, I said, pointing to a line about the house's power. This is what we carry. Amy nodded, her fingers tracing the pages, and I felt the house's approval, its hum, a warm embrace. We spent the evening baking bread, the kitchen filled with the scent of yeast and rosemary, the cracked mirror reflecting our laughter. The shadows danced, forming shapes that weren't quite human, but felt familiar, like the women in the journal watching guiding. Before she left, Amy paused at the door, her eyes on the key which I'd set on the counter. What does it open, Grandma? She asked, her voice soft but curious. I don't know yet, I said, smiling. But the house will tell us when it's time. She nodded, her trust in me absolute, and I felt it, a bond stronger than any I had had with Nathan, rooted in truth, in the house, in the power we were both beginning to understand. As her car pulled away, the house settled its hum, softening to a lullaby, its shadows folding around me like a cloak. I returned to the kitchen, the key in my hand, its iron warm, alive. I thought of the will, the trust, the steps I'd taken to protect Amy and myself. They were more than legal documents. They were declarations, spells cast to secure our future, to break the chains of exploitation. The house hummed in agreement, its shadows shifting, forming a circle around me, and I felt them, the women of my grandmother's journal, their strength mine to wield. I didn't know what the key would unlock, but I trusted. It trusted the house, trusted the path I was on. Nathan and Pauline's betrayal had sparked this journey, but Amy's trust, the house's hum, and the key's promise were guiding me forward. I was no longer just Iris Lorne, the widow who paid the bills. I was a keeper of this place, a bearer of its secrets, and I was ready for whatever came next. The house was a fortress now, its walls steeped in a quiet strength that matched my own. I stood in the kitchen, the iron key from the attic resting on the counter, its vine-shaped handle glinting in the morning light like a promise yet to be fulfilled. The silver crescent brooch on my blouse pulsed faintly, as if in rhythm with the house's low hum of vibration that seemed to rise from the earth itself, threading through the oak tree's roots and into my bones. The journal lay open beside the key, my grandmother's words a beacon. Hold your ground, and the house will hold you. I was holding it now, not just for myself, but for Amy, for the women who'd come before, for the legacy I was reclaiming. 3 days had passed since my visit to the lawyer, since I'd revised my will and set up a trust for Amy, cutting Nathan and Pauline out of my legacy. The house had hummed louder that day, its shadows curling around me like a protective cloak, as if it approved of my choices. Amy's visit had solidified something in me, a bond rooted in truth, a shared spark that the house recognized. But Nathan and Pauline were not done with me, not yet. I felt it in the air, a tension like the hush before a storm, and the house felt it too, its hum sharpening its shadows watchful. The letter arrived first, slipped through the mail slot at dawn. Its envelope crisp and white, Nathan's handwriting scrawled across it. Mom. Just one word, but it carried a weight I hadn't expected. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of the boy he'd been. I held it, my fingers tracing the ink, and the house hummed softly, as if urging me to read, but not to soften. I opened it, the paper unfolding like a confession, and sat at the kitchen table, the cracked mirror above the stove reflecting my steady gaze. Dear Mom, the letter began. I've been thinking about what you said about what happened at dinner. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much we've hurt you, how much we've taken for granted. Pauline's sorry, too. She's been a mess since that night, blaming herself for everything. We were wrong, and we want to make it right. Can we talk? Please. I miss you. Nathan. The words were earnest, almost raw, but they didn't reach me the way they might have years ago. I saw them for what they were, a plea, yes, but also a performance, a carefully crafted attempt to pull me back into their orbit. The house's hum grew sharper, a warning note, and the shadows in the room shifted, forming fleeting shapes. Vines, hands, faces that seemed to watch Nathan's words as skeptically as I did. I set the letter down next to the key and felt a surge of clarity, like the first breath after waking from a long sleep. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I went to the garden, the key in my pocket, the brooch glinting on my chest. The wildflower seeds Amy and I had planted were beginning to sprout tiny green shoots, pushing through the soil, defiant and alive. I knelt, my hands brushing the earth, and felt the oak tree's roots pulsing beneath, in sync with the house's hum. The key warmed in my pocket as if it too were part of this moment, part of the strength I was drawing from the land, from the women who'd tended it before me. The doorbell rang at noon, sharp and insistent, pulling me from the garden. I knew it was them. Before I reached the door, Nathan and Pauline. Their presence, a disturbance in the house's quiet rhythm. I wiped my hands on my apron, the key a steady weight in my pocket, and opened the door. Nathan stood there, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed with something that might have been guilt. Pauline was beside him, her posture stiff, her makeup flawless, but her smile strained like a mask that didn't quite fit. Mom. Nathan said, his voice soft, almost pleading. Can we come in? I stepped aside, not out of welcome, but curiosity. The house's hum rising to a low crescendo, its shadows gathering at the edges of the room. They entered the living room, their steps hesitant, as if they sensed the change in the air, the shift in power. The gray curtains were gone, replaced by sheer ones that let in the light, and the crystal vase had been removed, leaving the sideboard bare, except for a small vase of wildflowers I'd picked that morning. The house felt mine again, and they seemed out of place intruders in a space I had reclaimed. Pauline sat first, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for her influence and finding it gone. Nathan stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. The silence stretched heavy with unspoken truths, and the house's hum grew louder, a vibration that seemed to pulse through the walls, urging me to speak. "I got your letter." I said, my voice calm but unyielding, the key in my pocket warming against my thigh. "You want to talk, so talk." Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, I... We messed up. That night, what Pauline said, what we did. It was a mistake. A stupid, thoughtless mistake. We weren't trying to hurt you." Pauline nodded, her voice softer than I had ever heard it, but rehearsed like a line she'd practiced in the mirror. "Iris, I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. I just wanted the dinner to go smoothly for everyone to get along. I thought a little something in your drink would help you relax. It was wrong, and I'm horrified by it." I watched her, my eyes steady the house's shadows curling closer, as if judging her words. The brooch on my chest pulsed a faint glow only I could feel, and I remembered my grandmother's journal, her warning. "They'll apologize when they need something. Trust the house to show you their truth." I leaned back in my chair, the key a silent ally, and let the silence stretch, letting their words hang in the air like smoke. "A mistake," I repeated, my voice low, cutting. "You put something in my glass, Pauline, without my knowledge, to keep me quiet. And you..." Nathan stood there and let it happen. "That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Nathan flinched, his eyes dropping to the floor, but Pauline pressed on, her voice rising slightly, a crack in her composure. "It wasn't like that, Iris. It was just a sedative, something harmless. I was desperate. You know how tense these dinners get, how you and Nathan argue. I thought I was helping." "Helping," I said, my voice sharp, now the house's hum rising to match it. The shadows seemed to thicken, pooling around Pauline's chair, their forms less vague now, almost human. "You helped yourself, Pauline. To my money, my home, my silence. For years, I've paid your bills, your mortgage, your car, Henry's school. I've sat at your table and been corrected, dismissed, erased. And you thought drugging me would make it easier to keep using me." Pauline's face paled, her hands tightening in her lap, but she didn't deny it. Nathan stepped forward, his voice pleading. "Mom, please. We know we've taken you for granted. I know I haven't been the son I should be, but we're family. We can fix this." I stood, the key in my pocket, pulsing the brooch, glowing faintly as if the house itself were lending me its strength. "Family doesn't drug each other. Nathan." I said my words, a quiet storm. "Family doesn't take and take until there's nothing left. I heard you that night, both of you planning to silence me. I switched the glasses because I was done being your prop." Pauline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, and Nathan froze, his eyes wide with shock. The house's hum grew louder, a vibration that shook the air, and the shadows seemed to close in, their forms clearer now. Women, their faces indistinct, but their presence undeniable, watching from the edges of the room. You switched the glasses," Pauline whispered, her voice trembling. "That's why I..." "Yes," I said, my voice steady, unapologetic. "You drank what you meant for me, and now you know what it feels like to be powerless." The silence that followed was heavy, charged, the house's hum, a chorus of approval. Nathan's face crumpled, his hands clenching into fists, but he didn't speak. Pauline's eyes glistened, but her tears felt staged, a performance I'd seen too many times. "Iris," she said, her voice breaking, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear. We're so sorry. We want to make this right." I looked at them, my son and his wife, and saw them clearly not as family, but as people who'd used me, who'd taken my kindness and turned it into a chain. The house's shadows seemed to nod their forms, flickering as if echoing my grandmother's words. Forgive if you must, but do not forget. Hold your ground. I felt it then, a power not loud or violent, but deep-rooted like the oak tree outside its branches, whispering truths the house had always known. I forgive you. I said, my voice calm but final, the key in my pocket pulsing in agreement. But forgiveness doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean access. You've taken enough, and I'm done giving. The bank transfers are stopped. The will is changed. This house, my life, my resources, they're mine now and Amy's. Nathan's face fell, his mouth opening, but no words came. Pauline's tears spilled over, but they didn't move me. The house's hum was a shield, its shadows a circle around me, and I felt them, the women of my lineage, their strength mine to wield. Mom, Nathan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, please don't cut us out. We need you. You needed my money. I corrected, my voice steady, the brooch glowing faintly. You needed my silence. But you don't need me. You never did. The words hung in the air sharp and true, and the house's hum rose to a crescendo as if sealing them into its walls. Pauline stood, her hands trembling, and Nathan followed, his shoulders slumped. They moved toward the door, their steps heavy as if the house itself were pushing them out. We'll talk again, Nathan said, his voice hollow, but I didn't respond. Then the door clicked shut behind them, and the house settled, its hum softening to a lullaby, its shadows folding around me like a warm embrace. I stood in the living room, the letter still on the table, the key and journal beside it. The wildflowers in the vase glowed in the fading light, their petals vibrant against the bare sideboard. I felt no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet strength, a clarity that had been buried under years of giving. The house had seen it all. Nathan's excuses, Pauline's performance, my refusal to bend, and it had stood with me, its power mine to claim. I walked to the garden, the key in my pocket, the brooch glinting on my chest. The oak tree loomed above its branches, swaying, its roots pulsing in sync with the house's hum. I knelt, my hands brushing the soil, and felt it, a connection not just to the earth, but to the women who'd tended it, who'd faced their own betrayals and emerged stronger. The key warmed, its hum a quiet promise, and I knew it held a secret, a door yet to be opened, a truth yet to be revealed. That night, I wrote in the journal, my words flowing onto a blank page, a continuation of my grandmother's legacy. I faced them today, and I did not break. The house held me as it held you. I am learning what it means to be one of us. The shadows danced, their forms clearer now, and I felt them, the women of my lineage, their strength, a chorus, their presence, a shield. The key lay beside me, its iron glinting, and I trusted. It trusted. The house trusted the path I was on. Amy called as I closed the journal, her voice bright through the phone. Grandma, are you okay? I had a feeling something happened today. I smiled, the house's hum warming my chest. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said. Nathan and Pauline came by. They apologized, but I held my ground. Good, she said, her voice fierce with pride. You deserve that, Grandma. You deserve everything. So do you. I said, my heart full. Come by tomorrow. We'll plant more flowers. As I hung up, the house settled, its hum, a quiet lullaby, its shadows a circle of protection. I was no longer just Iris Lorne, the widow who paid the bills. I was a keeper of this place, a bearer of its secrets, a woman who'd faced betrayal and chosen herself. The key, the brooch, the journal, they were pieces of a puzzle, a legacy I was only beginning to understand. And whatever came next, I was ready with the house at my side, its power mine to wield. The house woke with me at dawn, its hum a soft lullaby that seemed to rise from the earth, threading through the oak tree's roots and into the floorboards beneath my feet. I stood in the kitchen, the iron key from the attic warm in my palm, its vine-shaped handle glinting in the first light like a promise half revealed. The silver crescent brooch pinned to my blouse pulsed faintly, as if in harmony with the house's rhythm, a reminder of the power I was claiming not just for myself, but for the women who'd lived here before, and for Amy, who would carry it forward. My grandmother's journal lay open on the counter, its pages filled with her words. The house holds our strength, Iris. Build with it, and it will endure. And I felt them, a chorus of voices woven into the walls, urging me to create, to grow, to become. The confrontation with Nathan and Pauline had been a turning point, a severance of the chains that had bound me to their expectations. Their apologies, though earnest in parts, had been a performance, a final attempt to pull me back into their orbit. But I'd held my ground, the house at my side, its shadows, a shield, its hum, a song of defiance. I'd forgiven them, not for their sake, but for mine, to free myself from the weight of their betrayal. Now the path ahead was clear, not easy, but mine to shape, rooted in the legacy of this house and the strength I had rediscovered within myself. I started in the garden, where the wildflower seeds Amy and I had planted were now vibrant sprouts, their green tips pushing through the soil like tiny acts of rebellion. I knelt my hands, sinking into the earth, and felt the oak tree's roots pulsing beneath in sync with the house's hum. The key in my pocket warmed, as if it, too, were part of this moment, part of the life I was building. I planted more seeds, poppies, daisies, foxglove, each one a promise to let something wild and free take root. Not just in the garden, but in me. The house seemed to approve, its hum rising to a gentle melody, its shadows curling around the garden's edges like a protective embrace. Back inside, I turned to the sewing room, a space I had reclaimed from Pauline's sterile guest room decor. The walls were bare now, save for the tapestry I'd hung, its blues and greens, a reminder of the girl I'd been, the one who'd dreamed before she learned to sacrifice. I pulled Elias's old shirts from a box, their fabric soft with memory, and began cutting them into squares for a quilt. Each snip of the scissors felt like a ritual, a stitching together of past and present, a reclamation of the life I had set aside. The house hummed as I worked, its shadows dancing across the walls, forming patterns, vines, hands, faces that seemed to nod in approval, as if the women of my grandmother's journal were watching their presence woven into the fabric of this place. I sewed late into the morning, the needle moving with a rhythm that matched the house's hum, each stitch a declaration of my return. The quilt grew under my hands, a patchwork of Elias's shirts, my mother's tablecloth, and scraps of fabric I'd saved from my childhood, a dress I had worn at 16, a scarf my grandmother had knitted. It was more than cloth. It was a story, my story, and the house seemed to recognize it, its hum softening to a lullaby as I worked. Amy arrived at noon. Her knock a bright note in the quiet house. I opened the door and she stepped inside, her eyes sparkling with a mix of curiosity and excitement. "Grandma," she said, hugging me tightly. "It smells like bread in here. Did you bake?" I smiled, leading her to the kitchen where a loaf of rosemary bread sat cooling on the counter, its crust golden and fragrant. "I did," I said, cutting a slice and handing it to her. "For us." She took a bite, her eyes closing in delight, and the house hummed, its shadows curling around her like a welcome. We sat at the table, the key and journal between us, and I told her about the quilt, the garden, the small acts of reclamation that were reshaping my life. This house, I said, my voice soft but certain, it's more than a place. It's a legacy, Amy. Our legacy. I'm building something new for me, for you, for the women who came before us. She nodded her eyes on the key, its iron glinting in the sunlight. What does it open, Grandma? She asked, her voice curious, but not pressing. I keep thinking about it. It feels important. I don't know yet. I said, my fingers brushing the key's handle, feeling its warmth, its pulse. But the house will show us when it's ready. It always does. We spent the afternoon together, moving between the garden and the sewing room, our hands working in tandem. She helped me plant more wildflowers, her laughter bright as we pressed seeds into the soil. And then we sewed, her stitches, clumsy but earnest, a mirror to my own when I was her age. The house hummed with us, its shadows dancing their forms clearer. Now women, their faces indistinct, but their presence undeniable, a chorus of strength that bound us together. As we worked, I told her stories not just of my grandmother, but of my mother of Elias, of the girl I'd been before I learned to give too much. I told her about the oak tree, how it had stood through storms and wars, its roots a map of our family's history. I told her about the journal reading passages aloud, my grandmother's words, a bridge between us. The house sees what you cannot, I read. My voice steady, and Amy's eyes widened, as if she felt it too, the house's presence, its power, its promise. You're like them, she said, her voice soft but certain. The women in the journal. You're strong, Grandma. I want to be like that. You already are, I said, squeezing her hand, the key in my pocket, pulsing in agreement. You see the truth, Amy. You always have. That's your strength. She smiled, her eyes glistening, and the house's hum rose a warm chorus that seemed to wrap around us both. We finished the quilt square together, a patchwork of memories, and hung it on the wall, a symbol of our shared work, our shared legacy. The shadows danced their forms clearer now, as if the women of my lineage were standing with us, their hands guiding ours. That evening, I wrote to Mabel again, a second letter on the vine-embossed stationery from the attic. Dear Mabel, I wrote, the house is waking up, and so am I. Amy is with me, and we're building something new. Tell me about your days here, the stories I have forgotten. I want to weave them into ours. I sealed it the act, a ritual, a connection to a cousin who'd known this house, who'd felt its hum, who'd carried its secrets. The key on the table glowed faintly as if approving, and I felt it a thread stretching across time, tying me to Mabel, to Amy, to the women who'd come before. The next morning, I returned to the garden, the key in my pocket, the brooch glinting on my chest. I weeded, planted, tended the wildflowers, each act a reclamation, a rooting of myself in this place. The oak tree loomed above its branches, swaying its roots pulsing, and I felt it a connection that went beyond the physical, as if the tree and the house were one, their strength flowing into me. I thought of Nathan and Pauline, their apologies, their attempt to pull me back, and felt no anger, only a quiet certainty. They were part of my past. But this, the garden, the quilt, Amy, the house was my future. I began reading again, pulling books from the shelves I'd ignored for years. My mother's poetry, with its images of storms and roots, spoke to me now, its words echoing the house's hum. I read late into the night, the key beside me, its iron warm, alive. The shadows danced their forms clearer now, women, their hands outstretched, their eyes glinting like the brooch. I felt them, their strength, their stories, and I knew I was building something that would endure not just for me, but for Amy, for the women who would come after. Amy returned the next day, bringing a sketchbook filled with drawings of the garden, the oak tree, the house. I want to capture it, she said, her voice bright with purpose, the way it feels like it's alive. I smiled, showing her how to press wildflowers between the pages, a skill my grandmother had taught me. We worked together, our hands moving in rhythm, and the house hummed its shadows, curling around us, as if claiming Amy as one of its own. We talked about her dreams college art, a life beyond the constraints of her parents' world. I told her about the trust, how it would support her, how it was hers alone, untouchable by Nathan or Pauline. Her eyes widened, but she didn't protest, only hugged me tightly, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Thank you, Grandma. I don't know how to repay you. You don't repay love, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You live it. The house hummed its shadows dancing, and I felt it a legacy taking shape, not just in the trust or the quilt, but in Amy, in the spark she carried, the same spark I'd found in myself. The key in my pocket pulsed its hum, a quiet promise, and I knew it was part of this part of the life I was building. I didn't know what it opened not yet, but I trusted the house, trusted its timing, trusted the women who'd guided me here. By the week's end, the house felt different, lighter, brighter, but no less powerful. The sewing room was alive with color, the quilt growing under my hands, each square a story, a memory, a promise. The garden bloomed, the wildflowers a riot of color against the green, and the oak tree stood sentinel, its roots a map of our strength. I wrote more letters to Mabel, to old friends, to myself, each one a thread in the tapestry I was weaving, a life rooted in authenticity, not obligation. The key remained a mystery, its iron warm, its hum, a constant companion. I carried it with me, feeling its weight, its promise, and I began to dream again. Doors locked and waiting, their handles etched with vines, their surfaces glowing with the same light as the brooch. The house was guiding me, its hum, a map, its shadows a guide. And I trusted. It trusted the women who'd come before and trusted the legacy I was building. Amy visited daily now, her presence a joy, her laughter a counterpoint to the house's hum. We baked, sewed, planted, and talked our bond growing stronger with each shared moment. She drew the house, the garden, the oak tree, her sketches capturing not just their form, but their spirit. As if she too felt the hum, saw the shadows. This place is magic, she said one evening, her voice soft, her eyes on the key. I feel it, Grandma, like it's part of us. It is, I said, smiling, the key in my hand, the brooch glowing faintly. And we're part of it. As the days passed, I felt the house settle its hum, a steady rhythm, its shadows a constant presence. I was no longer just Iris Lorne, the widow who paid the bills. I was a keeper of this place, a bearer of its secrets, a woman who'd faced betrayal and built something new. The quilt, the garden, the letters Amy, they were my legacy rooted in the house, in the women who'd come before, in the power I'd claimed. The key lay on the table each night, its iron glinting, its hum a promise of something yet to come. I didn't know what it opened, a door, a chest, a truth, but I knew it was part of this part of the life I was building. The house would show me as it had shown my grandmother, as it would show Amy. And when it did, I would be ready with the house at my side, its power mine to wield its legacy, mine to carry. The house was a symphony at dusk. Its hum, a gentle melody that wove through the oak floors, the walls, the roots of the ancient tree outside. I stood on the porch, the iron key warm in my hand, its vine-shaped handle glinting in the fading light like a star about to speak. The silver crescent brooch on my blouse pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in sync with the house's rhythm, a reminder of the power I'd claimed over these past weeks. My grandmother's journal rested on the table inside its pages, filled with her words, and now mine, a tapestry of stories that bound me to the women who'd lived here before, to Amy, to the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. The wildflowers in the garden glowed under the twilight, their colors vibrant against the earth, lupite, daisies, foxglove, a testament to the seeds Amy and I had planted to the life we were nurturing. The oak tree loomed above its branches, swaying, as if whispering secrets, its roots pulsing in harmony with the house's hum. I felt it a connection that went beyond the physical, a thread stretching through time, tying me to my grandmother, my mother, and now Amy, the keeper of our legacy. The confrontation with Nathan and Pauline had been a storm, their apologies a fleeting rain that couldn't wash away years of exploitation. I'd forgiven them, not for their sake, but for mine, to free myself from the weight of their betrayal. The house had stood with me, its shadows a shield, its hum a song of defiance, and I'd emerged stronger. Not just Iris Lorne, the widow who paid the bills, but a guardian of this place, a bearer of its secrets. The quilt in the sewing room, the wildflowers in the garden, the letters to Mabel, they were my legacy rooted in authenticity, not obligation. Tonight, I felt a pull, a summons from the house stronger than before. The key in my hand hummed its vibration sharper, as if it had been waiting for this moment. My dreams had been filled with doors locked, vine-etched, glowing with the same light as the brooch, and I knew the time had come to find what the key unlocked. I walked inside the house's hum, rising to a chorus, its shadows curling around me like a protective embrace. The journal lay open, my grandmother's final entry. A guide. The house will show you when you're ready. Trust it, Iris. Trust yourself. I moved through the house, the key leading me like a compass, its hum guiding my steps. The shadows danced their forms clearer now. Women, their faces soft but resolute, their hands outstretched as if pointing the way. I climbed the attic stairs, the air thick with dust and memory, and stood before the carved chest where I'd found the key. Its vine patterns seemed to shift in the dim light alive, as if the house itself were breathing. I knelt my fingers, tracing the carvings, and felt a click, not physical, but deep, resonant, like a lock turning in my soul. The chest opened easily, revealing not just the journal, but a hidden compartment, its edges etched with the same vines as the key. Inside was a small, iron-bound box, its surface warm, humming in sync with the key. I inserted the key, my hands steady, and turned it. The lock clicked, and the lid opened, revealing a single object, a crystal no larger than a walnut, its surface swirling with colors that seemed to hold the light of the house itself. It pulsed its rhythm, matching the house's hum. The brooch's glow my own heartbeat. I lifted the crystal, and the house exhaled its shadows, gathering their forms now distinct my grandmother, my mother, women I'd never met but knew in my bones. They stood around me, their presence a chorus of strength, their eyes glinting with pride. The crystal warmed in my hand, and I saw it a vision, not a memory, but a truth woven into the house's roots. It showed me the women who'd lived here, each facing her own betrayal, each finding her strength in this place. My grandmother outwitting her scheming sister, my mother standing firm against a world that tried to silence her, and now me breaking free from Nathan and Pauline's chains. The crystal pulsed, and I understood. It wasn't just a relic. It was the heart of the house, a vessel for its power, its secrets, its legacy. The key had led me here not to a door, but to this truth, this strength that had always been mine. I held the crystal to my chest, and the house's hum rose to a crescendo, a song of triumph, of completion. The shadows nodded, their forms fading, but their presence lingering, woven into the walls, the oak tree, the wildflowers outside. I descended the stairs, the crystal in one hand, the key in the other, and sat at the kitchen table. The cracked mirror reflected me, not fractured, but whole, my eyes bright with a light that matched the crystal's glow. I wrote in the journal, my words flowing onto a blank page, a final entry in this chapter of my story. I found the heart of the house tonight, and it showed me who I am. I am Iris, keeper of this place, bearer of its secrets. I am not alone. Amy is with me, and the house will guide us both. The next morning, Amy arrived, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, her eyes bright with anticipation. I showed her the crystal, the key, the journal, and told her everything, the dreams, the shadows, the women who'd come before. Her eyes widened, but she didn't doubt, didn't question. She took the crystal, her fingers brushing its surface, and the house hummed, its shadows curling around her, claiming her as one of its own. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft but certain. "It feels alive." "It is," I said, smiling. "It's the heart of the house, Amy. Our heart. It's yours now, did too." We spent the day at the garden, planting the last of the wildflower seeds, our hands working in rhythm with the house's hum. The oak tree stood sentinel, its branches swaying, its roots pulsing. And I felt it a legacy complete, not in wealth or power, but in love, in truth, in the strength we shared. Amy sketched the crystal, its colors swirling across her page, and I saw it, the spark in her, the same spark I'd found in myself, now burning bright. That evening, I baked bread, the kitchen filled with the scent of rosemary and yeast, and we ate together, our laughter a counterpoint to the house's hum. The shadows danced their forms soft now, not guiding but celebrating, as if the women of my lineage were raising a glass to us. I thought of Nathan and Pauline, their apologies, their absence, and felt no bitterness, only peace. They were part of my past. But this, the garden, the quilt, Amy, the crystal, was my present, my future. I wrote one last letter to Mabel, enclosing a pressed wildflower, its petals vibrant against the vine-embossed stationery. "Dear Mabel, I wrote the house showed me its heart, and I've found mine. Amy is with me, and we're building a legacy together. Come visit, cousin. The house is waiting for you." I sealed it, the act, a final ritual, a thread woven into the tapestry of our story. As night fell, I stood on the porch, the crystal in my pocket, the key on a chain around my neck, the brooch glowing faintly on my blouse. The house hummed its shadows, soft, its presence a warm embrace. I looked out at the garden, the wildflowers glowing under the stars, and felt it a peace that wasn't just closure, but a beginning. I'd faced betrayal, reclaimed my space, built a legacy, and found the heart of the house. I was Iris Lorne, keeper of this place, bearer of its secrets, and I was whole. The oak tree swayed its branches, whispering, and I smiled, knowing the house would guide Amy as it had guided me. The crystal pulsed. The key hummed, and the shadows danced, a chorus of women who'd stood where I stood, who'd faced their own storms and emerged stronger. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't bitter. I was free, rooted in this place, in this moment, in the love I'd found with Amy, with the house, with myself. I turned back inside the house's hum, a lullaby, its shadows a circle of light. I was home, and that was enough.